All right, so let's see if you did these practice problems correctly. So square root of -1 should have been a freebie. We told you before that the square root of -1, that is what we call I. That is equal to I. All right, and then square root of -64. Well, 64 is a perfect square, so we could break this up into the square root of 64 times the square root of -1. And the square root of 64, again, is a perfect square. You can put that in your calculator, or you could think about what two numbers multiplied by each other give you 64 that are the same number, and that would be 8. And again, the square root of -1 is I, so this is 8I. You don't have to do this step here. You don't have to do this step here, especially if it's a perfect square. Excuse me, especially if it's a perfect square and you know what the perfect square of 64 is, or of 100 is, or whatever, then you just can do it straight out. So that's how I'm going to do the next one. That is perfect square, which is number 4. So I'm going to skip down to number 4 real quick. I know that the perfect square of 100 is 10. So I know that the square root of -100 is going to be 10I. Okay? The negative basically becomes the I when we take it out. All right, 3 and 4 are not perfect squares, but they might have some perfect squares hidden inside of them. So I'm looking at 24, and I know that 24 factors into 1 times 24, not helpful so far, 2 times 12, not helpful so far, 3 times 8, not helpful so far, and 4 times 6. 4 times 6. 4 is the only perfect square I have here. So this is going to break up into the square root of 4 times the square root of -1 times the square root of 6. And we should know the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of -1 is I. And we don't know what the square root of 6 is. It's not a perfect square. So that's why we leave it under the radical. That's why we leave 6 under the radical. So that, the square root of -24, is actually 2I square root 6 when we simplify it. All right, so now with 18, I'm going to do something similar. What are the factors of 18? 1 and 18, 2 and 9. All right, cool. 9 is a perfect square. So I'm going to break this up into the square root of 9 times the square root of -1 times the square root of 2, because 2 times 9 gives me 18 back. All right, so what's the square root of 9? 3. What's the square root of -1? I. What's the square root of 2? Well, again, we don't know. It's not a whole number, so we leave it as square root of 2. All right, so hopefully you got those right. And if you didn't, that's okay, but hopefully you understand now how you would get them right in the future.